Welcome to Open Range. I'm your host, Gary Emineth. We're going to be talking to Justin Kringstad today, Director of the North Dakota Pipeline Authority. There's a lot going on in the Bakken, and gas is a big deal, whether it's CO2 or natural gas or even crude oil. There's a lot of things with pipelines that I think the viewers would like to get some background on it. We've had Justin on before. Great background and helps us understand what's going on. So Justin, welcome to Open Range.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Appreciate being here.
So I appreciate you coming on. And before we do, let's talk a little bit about your department, what you do, and a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so excellent. So the North Dakota Pipeline Authority, maybe one of the most misunderstood agencies in the state government, in that despite the title Pipeline Authority, it's 100% non-regulatory. So it was set up in 2007. The North Dakota Legislature at that time realized that the movement of North Dakota's energy resources, the crude oil, particularly at that time, was going to be a major issue facing Bakken development in western North Dakota. So the agency was set up 100% non-regulatory to work with the pipeline companies, developing new projects to support that oil and gas development, new processing facilities, market analysis, working with stakeholders, legislators to understand what the issues really are facing the region. And so I've been in that role now for close to 17 years. So we've seen quite the ride. When I got involved, we had no idea what was coming for the industry. We were trying to estimate what type of needs there would be in the region. We've always grossly underestimated the potential of that resource in West North Dakota. It's a phenomenal world-class resource. And so right now, the biggest challenge is just staying on top of developing trends to make sure that the infrastructure is in place to keep that sector of North Dakota's economy healthy and vibrant.
Justin, that's interesting. I never knew that you were non-regulatory. So the difference would be is when it's regulatory, you got to apply for applications, you get approval, you monitor everything. In your case, you're actually just working alongside industry to solve the problem. Is that correct?
Correct. And as part of the legislation that was created, there a number of tools were given to the Pipeline Authority. And the pipeline, I should have mentioned earlier, the Pipeline Authority is the North Dakota Industrial Commission. So the three elected members of the Industrial Commission, they are officially by law the North Dakota Pipeline Authority. I'm the director of the day-to-day activities of that. So a whole host of tools were provided during that initial legislation. A number of them haven't been used because for a number of reasons they weren't necessarily needed at the time for the sector. One tool that we'll likely get into here in this discussion is the ability for the Pipeline Authority to participate in a pipeline project, and we are just now starting down that road with a large natural gas project from western North Dakota over to eastern North Dakota. So some of those tools now that have been in the toolbox, underutilized or unutilized, funding has now come over the last couple legislative sessions, and now we are in a much different active role. So yes, 100% on the non-regulatory side, that still gets handled by the North Dakota PSC or the federal government on siting and those type of application decisions.
It's almost like, I never knew that, and it's interesting. It's almost like you're a commerce department to some degree for the Pipeline Authority. And I don't mean it that way, but when you say tools, you're talking money and opportunities to put some of the state's resources in it. And it's a problem we have. And if you just sometimes leave it to industry without state engagement, it creates a problem. And to what I would speak to of that is the problem, we got a gas problem, where we're having all this revenue we're generating from the state, which is awesome, from the oil reserves and the gas, but sometimes we can't get rid of the gas, we might have to curtail production. So talk to the viewers what that means and the benefit of what the Pipeline Authority can do in that regard.
Yeah, so natural gas is produced with the crude oil. So the Bakken development that we're all familiar with, seeing the oil production rates and the pumping activity and the drilling activity, they're focused on bringing that crude oil to the surface. And so I liken it to a Diet Coke for listeners, in that when you open a new bottle of soda, you're not able to drink that liquid without the fizz or the bubbles that come up with it. And so the same thing happens with our Bakken crude oil, in that it is very high in natural gas content. So it has just the same bubbles and the fizz that you would have in soda pop. The same thing happens when you take that oil from down at pressure. You lower the pressure as you bring it to the surface, and the natural gas starts to come out in the same way the bubbles come out of your soda pop. And if we don't have a solution for those natural gas molecules as they come up with the crude oil, one of two things would have to happen. And we've seen it in the past where when infrastructure was lacking, the ramp up in natural gas flaring, that is a situation that was unappealing to all parties at the time. It took a heavy amount of investment to address that. Going forward, our anticipation is that these wells, they get gassier over time. And so as this Bakken continues to age and as development continues, even to hold crude oil production levels flat, let alone grow it, we're going to have growing volumes of natural gas that are going to become problematic. Our current infrastructure is not sufficient to meet growing volumes of natural gas at any large scale. And so we've got an upstream issue where we need to address that. Otherwise, we start having an industry that's hampered, and we start seeing capital flow elsewhere around the country, or now many of our operators, global players, they can move that capital anywhere. So if we've got logistical constraints in Western North Dakota for any of the commodity streams, it does not bode well for the long-term health and vibrancy of Western North Dakota. So we have to have these solutions in place, and natural gas transmission is probably the number one issue right now that folks are trying to tackle in that custody chain.
So let's just, for the viewers, explain what upstream, and we hear downstream, we see these words, unless you're in the industry, you could guess. Help our viewers understand what the heck that means.
Yeah, so I'll try to keep the jargon to a minimum.
That's awesome. No, that's good.
The upstream sector is what we're familiar with, the drilling rigs, the pumping units, the actual production of the resource. And then you get to the midstream. So think of it like a river. Upstream, you've got the actual production. Midstream, which is where I typically live, which is the transportation and processing of those goods prior to ultimately use from downstream. And that's where the term downstream comes, which is the consumption side. So putting those molecules into your fuel tank, or putting that natural gas into your burner and your furnace. So you've got the upstream production, midstream, which is where I live, and then downstream, which is the actual consumption.
So we're going to want to talk a lot about the big project. We'll wait till towards the end of the show. I want to dig into it a little bit further, but before we do, help the viewers get a sense of the pipeline. We talk a lot about gas, but there's also the CO2 discussion that's been going on to use for enhanced oil recovery, but there's also crude oil pipelines. Can you explain what's in your portfolio, or what the different types of pipeline and the challenges, or maybe differentiate them for the viewers?
Yeah, so the pipeline network and pipeline industry as a whole likes to work out of sight, out of mind, and so people don't typically realize the amount of pipeline infrastructure we already have in place, not only in North Dakota, but nationally. So in North Dakota, we've got over 31,000 miles of pipeline systems, and that includes everything from your crude oil, natural gas, refined products, your gasoline and your diesel fuels, natural gas liquids, which would be your propanes, butanes, natural gasoline, you got carbon dioxide in there as well. But again, most of those miles taking place kind of in that western 1/3 of the state, and then the larger transmission systems that we're familiar with. And what we've got pulled up here is our natural gas transmission systems. And so these are taking those natural gas molecules from western North Dakota. It gets processed, cleaned up, and then put on these pipeline systems and moved to consumers either within North Dakota or outside. And we would have similar maps available online.
So the arrow on the bottom left, if we can just stay with that for just a second, the previous slide shows a storage area in the southwest corner. Could we go back to the previous slide? And so walk us through that a little bit, because it looks like there's when I was looking at it pre-show, it's fascinating, the idea that there's a storage area. Explain a little bit of what that means in relation to the pipeline and moving that gas out of the state.
Yeah, yep. So as part of the larger natural gas transmission system, anyone that's paid their utility bill knows that they use more natural gas in the winter and less natural gas in the summertime. So natural gas consumption is typically very seasonal. And when you think about large swings, that is difficult to manage a commodity that could have such strong ups and downs. And so natural gas storage is one of the solutions that the industry has. And I'm glad you brought that up, because North Dakota, I don't talk about it enough, and I don't think anybody fully appreciates. We have North America's single largest natural gas storage field in our backyard here. So it's right on the Montana-North Dakota border. Interconnects with our existing natural gas system. If we can pull up that map, I'll explain how that works.
And so you're thinking of the one with the storage area in the southwestern part of the state.
Yep,
and the pipelines. And you said it's the largest in the world, or in North America? And so we actually process the gas from the pipeline, and then it gets taken in there, so it's cleaned up, or is this just all raw gas that's stored there? So I'll let you go ahead.
So what we're looking at, it's that red blob that you would see in that southwest corner of this map. And so that is clean natural gas that's gone through processing facilities. It is ready for use by consumers. And so that pipeline network, some natural gas is coming down from Canada on that yellow northern border pipeline. We've got natural gas that comes from the Rockies, the Wyoming, Montana area towards that storage field, as well as North Dakota natural gas, using that infrastructure that you see to move natural gas in there. So in the summertime, they're moving those natural gas molecules into that storage field. They're holding it there temporarily until the demand picks up. And so then in the wintertime, that natural gas storage field, all those pipes will reverse, and they will start pulling that natural gas out of storage and get it into those homes and into the pipes as that demand really picks up. And so as we look at large infrastructure projects in North Dakota, this natural gas storage field is one of those key assets that not every part of the country can boast about. We have a phenomenal resource right here in our backyard.
So when you take the idea, and we'll dig into a little bit further, but the idea that gas is coming from all over Canada and Rocky Mountain stored, obviously there must be some kind of meter that stores it, because if I put it in, I want to get my money when it comes back. So the state has a process to manage all that, or is there an independent company that manages that process? So I'm going to ask that and have you answer that, because I know it's a longer answer than my time I have left up before we go to the break, because it's fascinating, and then also to understand the volume of the gas that's stored down there. That's pretty fascinating. So Justin, just before the break, I was going to ask you this long question, and I realized we had about 30 seconds. But the idea that there's this massive underground storage, give us the magnitude of the size of it, how it's managed, and then how, if I put gas in, how do I get my money back out of it? Just a perspective, just to give our viewers because it's hard for me to even get my head around that.
Yes, yeah. And so that asset is owned by WBI Energy, part of the MDU Resources Corporation, headquartered here in Bismarck. And so they own many of the natural gas pipeline systems that we're seeing. If we have that residue map handy, we can pull that up.
That first map with the red arrow in the bottom left-hand corner?
Correct.
The residue map, okay.
And so WBI owns a number of those pipeline systems. They operate in 5 states. And so that system, as it brings natural gas in during injection season, everything gets metered. The accounting departments and the sophistication of the software is phenomenal. Everybody that puts a molecule in knows they've got a molecule there and they can pull that back out. And so the business case, when you look at the size of that, I'm trying to put it starts to boggle the mind of a typical listener in how large. So it's 193 billion cubic feet of storage between that system and a smaller field just to the west.
193 billion
cubic
feet
of storage capacity. They use less than 50 of it. So there is a tremendous amount of extra space that can be used for natural gas as we, again, look at some of these larger infrastructure projects. Reliability is a key piece for everybody. When we turn on our furnace in the wintertime, we want it to work. And so we need that supply security, and storage is one of those pieces to make sure that works. And as we look at larger scale power demand and other industrial opportunities, having that storage option to move natural gas in the blink of an eye when it's needed, pull it out of storage, get it into the pipes, when you don't have to rely necessarily then on upstream conditions.
So if you take, you said 193 billion, and how much natural gas do we produce a day out of the Bakken?
Out of a dry stream, about 2.5 billion.
So we're producing 2.5, and if I do my math right, 193, and I'm just going to go to 202. So there's quite a few days of storage that's going to take us a good number if they use all of the capacity. But today you're saying they're using about 50 billion of it?
Yep.
So we're only at about a quarter.
Correct.
And I imagine there's a cost associated with, so they probably prefer just to put it in a pipe and get it out of state. But the idea with it is if we don't have to flare it, the key is can we get it there and then store it? That would become the obstacles, I imagine.
Yeah, so anything that commodity driven, whether it's agricultural products, any storage is critical in just managing that supply chain. And if you watch prices for natural gas, you typically have much higher prices in the wintertime versus the summertime. And so there are gas marketers then that you do get charged a fee. Think of it like a rental fee for if you're going to put your natural gas in there, you're going to pay a fee to do that. But you play that market and understand, okay, I need it for reliability, but then there's also a pricing arbitrage there as well that you can take advantage of on the storage side.
So when you is there still the same concern in the Bakken today that they might have to curtail crude with the gas increasing? Because a few years ago there was a panic button, but I know there's been some more infrastructure put in. Are we at a point where we're still okay for the next 3 to 5 years, or is there a season? Because you're talking about as the crude drops in production as they age, the gas goes up. So are we at a point where people are panicking yet in the industry, or are we okay?
The panic and the concerns are subsiding because of some of the solutions that are being put on the table right now. So when we look at, let's go to slide 4, that beyond 2026 scenario. We've got kind of a good visualization of what's coming. And so what we're looking at here, this is our natural gas transmission map. And then those yellow pipeline systems that you see, these are new projects that are not constructed today that are on the table for development. And so this is going to be a massive game changer, not only for the upstream, the producing community and having solutions for their natural gas,
And explain where that originates, the long map, and where it ends, because it's maybe a little hard to see on your screen. If it is a little bit, walk us through the kind of the geography. It looks like it's basically the state of North Dakota, but maybe you can lay out a little bit of, for our viewers, what that represents.
Correct, yes, and thank you, Gary. So yes, we're looking at primarily the state of North Dakota, the white outlines of the state there. We've got some of Montana and Minnesota tucked in there as well. But what we're looking at now, and so this is starting to address those concerns you mentioned earlier, but now we're switching from concern and to optimism, that the projects that are coming forward are at the scale and at the ability where they can change the trajectory of Western North Dakota, as well as much of the other corners of the state as these projects get developed. And so those two that we're looking at in the north, one of those projects, the smaller line that you see, that is a 24-inch line that's going over to a new power plant facility under development as we speak. That's about a 200 million cubic feet per day.
Is that, who's that by? Is that by Basin Electric? Basin Electric,
correct.
okay,
Yep.
200 million, okay. And so that's that short little one on the top left.
Yep.
And then what's the next one?
The next one, the Minot Industrial Pipeline, that is one that is new to maybe most folks. This has not been public now for very long. This is one that runs from Tioga to the Minot community. North American Iron is looking at putting their large iron ore processing facility just outside of the city limits there.
Of Minot?
Of Minot. They are a very large natural gas consumer as part of that infrastructure, that need. And so that justified the need for a new pipe over to that Minot community. And then the very large project that I think will warrant its own segment here on the show is the Bakken East project. That is the one that you're seeing in the central area from Watford City all the way to Fargo, and then another branch down to Ellendale.
So we're going to dig into that in the next segment. But just the idea of bringing natural gas to some of those communities, I think of Beulah, Hayes, and Stanton, those small communities that don't have natural gas. They all either have propane or the electricity, and it's shocking that there's communities in, I'd say, western North Dakota that doesn't have natural gas. And so part of the goal is to help accommodate small little communities like that, but at the same time help industrial uses where you would really get high volume consumption.
Yeah, projects like this, they only occur from large anchor users, and those would be your power facilities, your large industrial projects. Those are the things that really move the needle to get projects like these moving forward. The communities along the way that those projects are situated in, or that those pipes pass by, they are the ones that will certainly benefit from kind of secondary options to finally connect into that natural gas infrastructure and provide some local community growth.
Now you have a slide that talks about capacity when you look at moving it out of state. Can we maybe go to that slide?
Correct.
And look at slide number 3 that
Yes.
gives us some perspective.
Yep. And so what we're looking at on this graphic, this is the same as all the other maps, same pipes that we're looking at, but this is just putting it to scale of how much natural gas these projects or these systems can move. And you'll notice a couple things right away. You've got a gold system, that yellow Northern Border pipeline. That is North Dakota's largest. That's a 42-inch pipe, 2.4 billion cubic feet of natural gas per day. That pipe always leaves North Dakota full, mostly with North Dakota natural gas. And that is getting back to the concerns of the industry. That system is always full, and it will be almost essentially full of North Dakota natural gas exclusively here relatively soon. And at that point, we are out of options.
What's that little orange thing off the yellow, about a third of the way up? What does that represent, that little orange-red spot?
Yep, so those are pipes. So that is really the heart of the Bakken there. There are some large natural gas processing complexes, so some large pipes then that feed that short distance.
More of a gathering location for, and that's what that orange red piece on the big yellow is, runs
Correct.
into Northern Border. Big. And where does that end up, Northern Border Pipeline?
Down in Chicago.
Down in Chicago. So the Northern Border yellow ends up in Chicago. Let's go to the green one.
Yep, that is the Alliance pipeline. That's our second largest pipe to date. That's a 36-inch pipe that, again, if you notice, if this map continued, both Northern Border and Alliance originate up in that Alberta. So they are Canadian pipes that travel through. They were developed and put in place prior to any of the heavy Bakken development that we're familiar with today. So thankfully, they were in our backyard, so we were able to connect into them and largely move our current needs on those systems. Long term, they will not be sufficient for the growth we're expecting. And so what listeners and viewers should also look at here is you look at the small red lines and you think, okay, you look anywhere east of Bismarck, and there is, other than the Alliance pipeline, very limited access to natural gas in that whole eastern half of North Dakota. And so our old business model that we've all become accustomed to in the energy sector is let's get our energy products on these pipes, and they're going to go down to Chicago. They're going to go to all these other major places for consumption and get put to work. The projects that are in development are no longer taking that model of expanding these pipes or building pipes out of the region. We're developing opportunities within North Dakota to consume this natural gas so that we can have those benefits right here in our state.
And so that's really what's driven a lot of it is we just had low population, just no use for it, so we just move it out. And so that's been the case, and that's where, like when you talk about the Canadian pipelines, Alberta, they've just moved that to markets because Canada's got, it's like North Dakota, a lot of no population, big geography, right? And so and we were able to tap into some of that. So were those pipelines running at what capacity before the Bakken 10 years ago started cranking? Were they running at 50% capacity or?
They were running typically full, but they were running full of Canadian natural gas. Now, if you opened up the hood on one of those pipes, you would see it's almost exclusively North Dakota natural gas in that northern border. About 90% of the gas leaving on northern border is from North Dakota. The Canadian volumes are down to a relatively low volume at this point. The marketplace has just shifted.
So is that because Canada in their anti-fossil fuel mentality is they're not producing as much fossil fuel gas and crude, or is it because the market has pushed that?
The market has essentially, we did not have any other choice. As that natural gas comes up with the crude oil, we had to move that natural gas in a pipe. And those being the only local pipe options, that North Dakota molecule had to compete against a Canadian molecule and price its way into that pipeline system.
So it's really a function of price point and buying your way into that, if you will say, we're going to pay more to do it. Okay, that's awesome. We're going to go to the break and we come back. I want to dig into this WBI project and the costs and associated. I think it's exciting for a bunch of North Dakotans. So Justin, before the break, we just started kind of getting our head around the idea of WBI, a division inside of MDU Resources, North Dakota based, and the idea of keeping those molecules and using the resources to grow our industry, create jobs, all that kind of thing. So let's talk about just the scope of the project, the legislature's role in it. Sometimes I pick on them a little bit where they throw money at things, but there are projects that are really worth it. This is one that I'm a big fan of. But anyway, tell us a little bit about the project and the cost and the scope and the status of it all.
Yeah. Yep. So the Bakken East project, that was the name of the largest, most exciting project that I've had the opportunity to work on to date. And so we have this situation where we've discussed now the needs in western North Dakota, and we started to key up the framework that eastern North Dakota, largely, I don't want to call it a natural gas desert, but extremely limited in its ability to attract opportunities that need large-scale energy. And so the blue pipes and anything other than red that you're seeing on this graphic is existing pipe. The red pipe, that is the Bakken East project that WBI Energy is moving forward with. They are proposing a 36-inch pipeline from Watford City to that Underwood, North Dakota. So we'll call that kind of the western half of the project. It would be a 36-inch pipe, very large in scale. And then from Underwood area all the way to Fargo, they're proposing that to be a 30-inch pipe. About 1 billion cubic feet of natural gas per day is the current scope as far as the capacity of the project. And then you'll also see a smaller 20-inch lateral from that from the Spiritwood area down to the Ellendale community for additional natural gas needs that are continuing to develop down in that area. So this project now will finally marry the needs of upstream as well as the needs and opportunities across central and eastern North Dakota in what is going to be a game changer. I don't know how to scope it relative to other exciting things that have happened in North Dakota's history, infrastructure-wise, but this is one that will absolutely change the game and the opportunities across broad swaths of
if you were to help a person get their head around it, maybe you can't answer it, but you said 1 billion cubic feet a day. What would that equate to? With someone, in other words, when we talk federal deficit and budget, people sometimes, billion here, billion there, and you don't, and when it comes dollars, but if you take a community like a Bismarck and you take these areas, what is the expectation of how much gas would be consumed in a market like that, or some scale? In other words, just to put in the scale of 1 billion cubic feet is going to be available that never was available before.
Yeah. So if we picked the coldest, deepest part of winter, and again, it's extremely seasonal, but a community like Bismarck, just off of the cuff here, maybe 80 to 100 million cubic feet. So we're talking significantly larger scale.
In what window of time frame? 80 to 100 million?
In a day.
In a day.
80 to maybe 100 million cubic feet.
In a day.
In a day.
In a day. So if there's 1 billion a day, that's maybe 8 to 10%, but it's some number that gives them scope of it. And with a lot of no population going east, even though there's more there than here, but the idea this becomes a game changer to your point.
Correct. And when we look at large industrial projects, an ethanol facility per se, maybe 15 to 20 million cubic feet, a typical ethanol plant. A large scale power plant, you're talking anywhere from 100 million cubic feet to 200 million cubic feet. And so a project of this scale, and it takes this type of scale to make a project like this commercially viable. It takes multiple parties that need to come together. And that's probably one, if someone said, what's the most difficult part for a project developer to get a project done? It's herding all of those various parties. Everyone has complex decisions that they're making on their individual project. And now we've got the complexities of each of those that needs to stack together to finally mirror up with a pipeline developer that wants to take on something of this scale and work with their own complexities. And so all the timing, and that is one thing that we'll dive into as far as my office. We're trying to play a role in addressing the timing issues that it takes to get projects like this done.
So if you take this project, and WBI is a division of MDU, but they're moving to gas, let's just say to eastern North Dakota, communities, would the local utilities then be buying gas? So that's what the opportunity is, to create a contract so that community of Ellendale says, hey, we want a X number of cubic feet per day based on XYZ. Does it then just become a contract between the local utility that supplies it? Because obviously it's not just MDU all the way to the Minnesota border. There's other utilities, RECs, et cetera.
Yep, so the utilities, when we take a look at the stack of interested parties, fundamentally at its core, a pipeline company is extremely conservative. All pipeline companies. They do not build a pipeline project without firm, signed long-term agreements, typically 10 to 20 years, take or pay. Someone has to sign on the dotted line saying, I'm going to use this much natural gas, this much capacity every single day, and if I use it or not, I'm going to pay the bills for it. And you have to have many of these parties signing up together. So the local utilities are one small piece of that. It's the large power plants, large industrial users that are now in conversations, negotiating those type of contracts that need to get put in place in order to move forward. So yes, all kinds of stakeholders at the table right now in order to get this project.
So let's talk a little bit about the pipeline. You had the map that kind of showed where it's headed. Is that a firm location where it's plotted out in a sense on the board and that's the way it's going to be, or does it vary because they got easements, and which is so much different? And then give us a little contrasting this to the CO2 pipeline, which has created a whole crazy storm of frustration from people, eminent domain property rights, et cetera, versus the natural gas, how that interacts with it.
Yep, so the project, the maps that we've seen up on the screen, that's a proposed route. There will be fine tunings of that. They developed the project.
So that red line is a proposed. It doesn't mean because you have a problem that it may go 5 miles north or a mile north or south or something. It's just, you got to put something on paper to start somewhere to do an estimated cost. That's the point.
Correct. You have to have a starting point. And there are still parties, within the last 2 weeks, I've had 3 new parties that have not been in any conversations come to me looking for natural gas opportunities at large scale. So should any of those projects move forward, we could easily see small variations if those projects get cited differently.
So let's say somebody in Beulah or somewhere, could you say this goes to Underwood? Does it come, where does it go south? I didn't really look at the map, but does it, because at one point I always refer to Beulah, Hazen, Stanton, because I've been through that. I'm like shocked but they got coal. And the coal guys go, hey, we want to use electricity. You guys work at the plant, right? We don't want gas here. We want to use coal electricity. I'm kidding, but maybe that's so far from the truth. But the idea of getting natural gas there will it get to those communities, natural gas, or not?
It will. So you have Montana Dakota Utilities is Western North Dakota LDC, local distribution company that then provides service. So WBI building the large scale project, and then MDU Resources, Montana Dakota Utilities would be one of those parties looking to then serve local communities off of that pipeline. So there are smaller scale projects that will occur. Again, when we think about the size of phenomenal opportunities for those communities, but the large needle movers in the broader sense is going to be the industrial projects along that route, near or outside of these communities. So the community, not only will they have this access to natural gas, but they'll have the benefits of the industrial projects that are getting cited.
So you mentioned there's 3 people that came to you, companies of some sort using What type of interest is it? Is it all data center? Because we're going to, at the last segment here, we're going to talk about data centers, and I saw that one go down to Ellendale. I'm only guessing it's related to a data center. But the idea that what kind of thing industries are looking at having gas? Obviously, we're a big ag state, so there's need for ag as well. But do you have a sense of it? You can speak generically to some of those?
Yep. So it falls into several major baskets of these parties, and not only the ones recently, but the ones that have been at the table now for months and years. Power is a big piece of it, and that power is going a couple different directions. Either just traditional power needs that we have not only locally, but North Dakota, we participate in larger electric infrastructure systems. And so there are needs not only in North Dakota, but across those regions. And so North Dakota, we're used to being an energy powerhouse and energy generation. So having that right up here and transmitting that out, and then power, electric generation for data centers. And whether that's just your traditional cloud computing, storage type scenarios, or whether it's artificial intelligence type projects, but they're going to need the power for a number of those. So power is one of the biggest buckets. And then you have your large industrial users, whether they're looking at biofuels or other industrial processes along the route.
I've heard where there's been this discussion of bringing some of the shavings, if you will, from Minnesota related to mining some minerals out of it, whether it's, and so there's been multiple projects like that, which probably I would assume would be high gas, natural gas users as well for that industrial process. So those are a variety of things that I imagine that kind of play into the big picture.
Correct, yeah. So large industrials, the one in Minot, which is not on the Bakken East, but a separate project, 250 million cubic feet of natural gas, very large energy users in some of these projects.
Do you think that with the, where's our gas projected? In other words, if we're going to all of a sudden move 1 billion cubic feet a day to eastern part of the state and it got 250 to Minot, will that spur oil development?
That will be, so my shortfall is to the questions earlier about the concerns from the industry, will we have enough pipeline capacity? I tagged that shortfall of about 1.5 billion cubic feet of natural gas solutions we were going to need. And so seeing 1 billion cubic feet per day project in Bakken East, seeing the other projects that are developing in northern North Dakota, should all these projects move forward, none of these are done deals yet, there's still a tremendous amount of work yet to be done. Should these proceed forward and at the scope we're anticipating, that is a game changer. That puts western North Dakota in a position to have the opportunity to continue to thrive and keep a vibrant oil and gas sector.
So Justin, we've talked about capacity and movement. Talk a little bit about your department's role in all of this, and then also just, I want to really move into the data center. We talked about Ellendale and stuff, and there's people a little wound up about it, but we all have our phones. We all want to be real time. We want to have self-driving cars. We want all this knowledge that we want to be able to have at our fingertips. It takes processing power to do that, obviously, and so I think people get I sometimes think we overreact to all those things, but let's talk about your role in helping make this happen.
Yes, so the Pipeline Authority, one of the tools in the toolbox that it has is the ability to participate as a shipper on a pipeline system. And as I noted earlier, the conservative nature of the pipeline industry is that it will not move forward without signed agreements by all the parties to meet the scope. So we're talking about 1 billion cubic feet per day project in the Bakken East. The North Dakota Legislature in 2023 funded the ability for the Pipeline Authority to have up to $30 million per year in order to sign up for capacity. And that dollar figure was, at the time, what we thought was going to be appropriate and the need in order to help assist get a project like this across the finish line. As we were going through all the iterations with the parties, that need got closer to about $50 million per year, that a shortfall. And so where that fits, just to put it in perspective for listeners, on 1 billion cubic foot per day project, the state of North Dakota, if all of that funding that was allocated was used, that would be about 15 to 17% of the total pipe capacity. And so I'm not good at naming things or coming up with acronyms, but we're referred to as a capacity bridge program. So all of those parties that I mentioned have to be lined up and the timelines need to be perfect. That just simply doesn't happen. More than anyone else here, that there's so many things that go into project development that timelines can slip. And so our role with this capacity is, yes, should the Pipeline Authority sign up for capacity, our number one goal is to release that back to the private sector so that by the time this project is in service in 2030, our office is completely out of the scenario. We never spend a dime of that money. So the capacity that we do potentially take, we will then be working with those parties to say, okay, if you were not able to sign up in the first deadline and you still have a pipe capacity need for your project, we then have that capacity to offer, and you take it off of our hands, and now it's your obligation and your need.
And so that's about a $50 million per year.
Correct.
And if you take the revenue the state has from the oil industry, the billions that go into our coffers, what you're doing is you're mitigating some of that risk by putting $50 million aside. The goal is never to have to spend it, because there will be people like myself that have an idea, hey, I want to start this business, but I'm not ready to sign a 10-year agreement. So the state takes a little bit of that risk, is what you're saying, so the pipeline can go forward. That's really the goal. And did you guys as a group and the state and the legislature figured out that it's about $50 million a year that we're putting at risk to some degree, but it doesn't mean it's being spent, is your point?
Correct. And so for any of the shippers, no dollars are ever spent until the pipe is in service. So we're still talking 4 or 5 years down the road. It's just those obligations that you need to be there once the pipe is in service to pay the bills for that transportation service. And so the legislature, again, very sad. We've got some phenomenal legislators that understand this. The need, or we could have, and we've attempted in the past to say, okay, let's look at grant programs, let's look at loans. Those weren't needle movers. They just needed parties willing to sign up. And I think a very unique role that we can play here is that we can help keep the project moving forward, get those timelines from a regulatory perspective, get all of that work moving forward, and then our obligation then is to work with those parties to get it off of our books and get it into someone else's hand. We can do that in long-term chunks, we can do it in short-term chunks, worst case scenario is we work with a gas marketer to take this asset. So we're essentially buying an asset, which is space on a natural gas pipeline system. So we can work with a gas marketer to monetize the value of that. And the only way that we would end up spending if we allocated the full $50 million, and the only way we'd spend that is if everybody sat on their hands and did nothing here going forward.
And I guess the part of your point is you're buying it, the gas is going to go down the line, so you just might have to remarket it and take a discount of 10 or 15%. So you might spend a piece of it, but that's just part of what your department is, because you're not regulatory. So you're really almost, and it had came to me that you're almost like the Commerce Department, but you are almost like an industry partner, the state of North Dakota, in their vision. I mean, we got a bank in North Dakota, we got a mill and elevator, so maybe the state meddles, and we just don't sometimes have the resources financially as individuals or companies to do it. So the state stepped up and formed this. So that makes some sense to me.
Yeah, so far it's doing exactly what it was proposed to do. It's that commitment from the state and that clarity to the private sector that this is going to happen. The state is going to get behind this, and it has brought parties together at a pace that we couldn't have imagined.
So let's pivot now. We got about 5 minutes left. Let's talk about the data centers and what's going on and what's the view, because you have a slide that kind of talks about some of the things related to that opportunity and what's out there. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so obviously anyone that is watching the news and following what's happening at a national level or local level, they know that things are changing rapidly in the landscape. And so North Dakota, for power generation, as I mentioned earlier, just your traditional, but then also data centers, that will play a key piece in this. There are some that folks are familiar with, which is the project just north of Fargo, the Ellendale, the Applied Digital facilities. These computing centers are incredibly energy intensive, and they require a place that they can secure that energy resource, have the ability to work in those communities. If you haven't already, the Ellendale community would be a great spotlight to see what's been taking place down in that neck of the woods and how it's been responded to by the communities. But by and large, from what I'm understanding, it's been a pretty good working relationship from those scenarios. And we're going to see that likely play out at a much larger scale as some of these projects move forward. The pipeline project is not exclusively data-driven. It's a key piece of it, along with the other types of projects from the industrial side and traditional power gen.
I think the thing that viewers, I was involved with some Bitcoin stuff, and I know when you do air-cooled, sucks a lot of power. We are looking at a project down in South Dakota, 50 megawatt of power. And just to put it in perspective, 50 megawatt Bitcoin data center, that was going to be maybe a $20 million project to infrastructure to build that out. But when I didn't really understand the 50 megawatt of power, but when you take Aberdeen uses as a whole city 54 megawatts of power. So we were going to build a data center that was about the size of a football field, but it was going to take as much power as the whole city of Aberdeen. So those are big consumers that are going to be taking that power. But when you do AI, that gets ratcheted up a whole nother level.
Yeah, yeah. And so typically the phone calls and discussions from any of the data providers, they want to start the conversation about a gigawatt. That is now the new
A gigawatt.
Yep. So 1,000 megawatts, that is the new starting point, and then ratcheting up from there.
So if you take Coal Creek, which is up by Underwood, that's an 1,100 megawatt. So that's about
1.1 gig. Yep.
1.1 gigawatts. So these data centers that are AI are talking about the size of a Coal Creek facility. That's what they're wanting to do for these big data centers that they want to build out. It's in similar size.
From
and
an
going
electric,
up from there.
And scaling up potential from there.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so if you take the whole idea of coal and what the role it's played, and now they have a data center up at Coal Creek that's used the coal because Minnesota didn't want that dirty coal. And so we decided to consume it up here, I guess. The idea of using that natural gas, the coal, versus other opportunities, it's a more expensive process, isn't it, using natural gas, as opposed to like coal's really the cheapest when it comes to electricity on the grid, if you will.
Yeah, that I could probably be speaking. I don't know the exact electric markets of how those molecules get priced, but it's going to be all of the above. It's going to be North Dakota coal continuing forward. It's going to be new natural gas. It's going to be renewables, all of these things on the grid. And so as this gets built out, I've got a counterpart with the North Dakota Transmission Authority, which does the electric side. He's working on all those solutions into MISO, into SPP to make sure these molecules have a home that we can continue to serve that role.
Let me ask you a question about Transmission Authority. I know it's not yours. Do they operate like you do, or are they more of a regulatory group?
No, fully, almost mirror identical to myself.
Oh, really?
So they've played some roles in some electric transmission infrastructure out of the region. So yeah, the regulatory side still falls on the North Dakota Public Service Commission or on the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission.
We got about 1 minute and a half. So I'm a landowner. There's going to be a natural gas pipeline. Just give me the 1 minute on the idea of how that process is going to work. Will WBI be negotiating that, and does it have more authority than it does like the CO2 just to deal with bringing the pipeline?
Yep, so I will say, so WBI Energy, they've operated in the region now for over 100 years. They have a phenomenal reputation. They're out, they've got broad swaths of permission to survey from most of the landowners along the route already. They've got a phenomenal team out there working with landowners, and so they're getting that done. They're having community outreach meetings already, so they are being proactive and moving that forward. So they do have a phenomenal land team, phenomenal reputation, and typically natural gas pipes, the communities along the route are typically hungry for these projects to come, and so they're usually welcoming these natural gas pipes.
Yeah, you're just seeing the whole different mindset of Summit and their approach to strong arm. And of course, CO2 is all different than natural gas when it comes down to it doesn't mean that there's not risk, there always is. This has been fascinating. So as the project moves forward, Justin, we're going to have you back to try to give us some more updates on these things as the projects unfold, because this is great stuff for North Dakota.
Yeah, very exciting. So appreciate being here.
So thank you for joining us. We've been talking to Justin Kringstad, the Director of North Dakota Pipeline Authority. I'm your host, Gary Emineth. Thanks for watching.